This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Wednesday, September 23rd. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. A former Kano and Mali's junta leader have been announced as the country's interim president and vice president, respectively. This move comes despite pressure from West African leaders to return power to civilians. David Doyle reports.
Mali junta leader Colonel Assimi Goïta has announced retired Colonel Ba Ndao as the country's interim president following a military coup last month. And as for the vice president, he's filling that position himself. What's not yet clear is if West African leaders will be satisfied. Mali's junta has been under pressure from the Economic Community of West African States since the August 18th coup. It's nervous that a dangerous precedent is being set and wants power returned to civilians. Last week, ECOWAS threatened to step up economic sanctions if its conditions, such as appointing civilians to the presidency and premiership, were not met. But regional leaders also indicated that the vice president could be a soldier, as long as he was ineligible to replace the president. Goïta did not say whether the interim vice president would remain next in line for the presidency, as currently stipulated in a transition charter. Ndao was an aide to former military leader Moussa Traoré and a former defense minister under ousted President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. The M5 RFP coalition that organized mass protests against Keïta has since feuded with the junta over the military's role in the transition, but has signaled support for Ndao. A spokesman said the coalition hopes one of its members will be appointed interim prime minister. Ndao and Goïta are due to be sworn in on Friday, 2 days after an ECOWAS delegation arrives in the country.
David Doyle of Reuters with that report. The Sudanese government recently declared an economic emergency after the Sudanese pound lost 40% of its value in 1 month, and the annual inflation rate jumped to 167%. Sudan's transitional authorities are struggling to stabilize the currency, the weakness of which helped the protests against former President Omar al-Bashir. The economic strain is hitting traders in the Sajana market, one of Sudan's largest. Naba Mohidin reports from Khartoum.
Sudan's government declared an economic emergency this week as the Sudanese pound lost value and inflation soared. The Sudanese pound, which traded at 135 to the US dollar in August, was down to 250 per US dollar as of Monday this week. The economic strain has hit traders in Khartoum's Sajana market, where many businesses sell imported goods. Khalifa Mukashfi is one of the local traders who shut down his business due to the unfavorable currency rate.
We actually suffer a lot from the increasing of the exchange rates and the increasing of the dollar compared to the drop of the Sudanese pound. As local traders who buy from importers, we suffer a lot as we buy with different prices every moment. As those traders import with dollars and they can't balance with the parallel market price unless they increase the goods price, as the Sudanese pound is still in a very big drop.
Economic analysts blame the pound's fall on a slew of recently announced government policies that have prompted Sudanese to withdraw money from banks and buy US dollars on the black market to preserve their savings. Analyst Nair Mohammed say these policies include increases in fuel and gasoline prices, the second this year, and an increase in tariffs on imported goods.
Once all of that was declared, it's not applied yet. But once it was declared, the parallel market started to participate in dropping the Sudanese pound compared with foreign currencies.
Many Sudanese food manufacturers have also stopped production and distribution operations, leading to a scarcity of goods and higher prices of the market generally.
Most of the companies stopped the work, and some companies that are still working have increased the prices 100%, and 50% of the work has stopped. Even if you bought goods, you'll see a doubled price the next day.
Sudan is holding talks with the United States in the United Arab Emirates this week, hoping to have the country removed from the U.S. list of states that sponsor terrorism. Removal from the list would increase Sudan's access to international funds and help start the country's economic recovery. Naba Muhiddin for VOA News, Khartoum.
Liberian Nobel laureate Lima Bowie has announced a campaign against election-related violence in Liberia. This comes as the country is preparing for what promises to be hotly contested senatorial midterm elections. Bowie says her foundation is enlisting the services of hundreds of young peace ambassadors to lead the campaign in their neighborhoods. She says the young people will do it voluntarily because you cannot buy peace, but you can work for it. Bowie says her message to both the ruling Congress for Democratic Change and the opposition, as well as their supporters, is please don't touch the peace of the Liberian people. Doctors and public health experts are telling people in the Northern Hemisphere to prepare for the worst in the coming months when both the coronavirus and the flu virus are likely to be circulating at the same time. It is a 1-2 punch that could cause even more deaths and has the potential to overwhelm healthcare systems. Here's VOA's Carol Pearson.
Doctors say it's more important to get a flu shot this year than ever before. The CDC says anyone 6 months or older should get the vaccine.
We anticipate that there will be some people coming up who have both COVID and influenza at the same time, which would be very devastating, obviously, and increase the risk of death from one or both of them. So anything we can do to prevent influenza and to prevent COVID, of course, we want to do.
Both are respiratory viruses. Both can be lethal. And flu season is practically here.
We are going into this flu season with both hands tied behind our back. And we are also working in a climate where trust in vaccines continues to erode.
The CDC reports a sharp drop in routine childhood immunizations because people are afraid of getting COVID-19. But doctors say there is nothing to fear.
All of the healthcare facilities are taking extra precautions to make the environment safe for people who come in.
Even when there isn't a pandemic, Professor Vasudevan says people justify opting out of getting a flu shot.
The flu vaccine is not always the most effective vaccine, so people use that as an excuse to not get the vaccine.
In recent years, we've been anywhere from probably a low number of 20% hit, and we've been as high as 60-65% successes.
Experts say even an imperfect vaccine can reduce the severity of infection.
There are also a number of myths associated with the flu vaccine, like getting the flu vaccine will actually give you the flu, which is not possible because the virus particles in the flu shot are dead, so they cannot multiply and give you infection.
CDC data shows that during past flu seasons, 80% of children who died from influenza were not vaccinated. And research from Duke University shows only a third of American adults got a flu shot in 2018. Young children, pregnant women, older adults, and people with underlying conditions are most at risk for hospitalization or death from a flu infection. African Americans and other minorities have a higher risk as well.
It worries me a lot that communities that are the hardest hit by COVID are also very heavily impacted by flu. And we know that vaccination rates are lower in these communities.
Vasudevan says doctors need to work with community leaders to let people know that the flu vaccine can save lives. She says the vaccines also have to be accessible and free of charge. Carol Pearson, VOA News, Washington.
Oklahoma was once home to more than 50 all-black towns, more than anywhere else in the United States. Most of those towns established primarily by freed slaves have vanished. But as VOA's Dora McQuarrie reports, the battle is on to save what's left of the 13 all-black towns that remain.
When the U.S. government forced more than 60,000 Native Americans to relocate to Oklahoma to make way for white settlers in the 1830s, their slaves came with them. After emancipation, the freed slaves, known as freedmen, settled and built their own towns,
where they would have the opportunity to live amongst people that looked like them, amongst people who understood the plights that they had escaped from, but ready to embark upon a new opportunity, form their own government in terms of their mayors and their elected officials, all of whom were like them. And it was an amazing opportunity.
The fully self-sufficient communities thrived. In the 1910s, the town of Boli was flourishing, with hotels, doctors, lawyers, schools, colleges, and restaurants.
They had their own newspaper in Boli. They had their own phone company. So it was a bevy of commercial and residential life, not to mention the thousands of farms around most of these towns.
But the Great Depression of the 1930s took a toll on the all-black towns. Many residents left to find work elsewhere. Town populations dwindled. Today, just 13 all-black towns remain in Oklahoma, including Grayson, population 140.
90% of the individuals are retirees, or individuals of some type of disability who move back to their home site, in Grayson. And so that makes up really the population in our community.
Today, an annual rodeo draws visitors to Grayson, where Anderson remembers flexing his cowboy skills as a teenager.
We didn't have a movie theater, and we didn't have a drive-in theater to go to, like on weekends for entertainment. But we could all saddle up a horse and go down to the corral. So we'd go down and challenge one another. We might ride the same horse, trying to figure out if we can rope a calf faster than the next person.
Shirley Ballard Nero grew up nearby in the all-black town of Clearview.
There were Indians that lived around us because this is the Creek Nation. So it's not just totally an all-black town. We all played at the same spot. We all had our mailboxes in the same spot, but when it was time for the school buses to arrive, we got on separate school buses.
Nero, a retired history teacher, returned home to Clearview with her husband, a retired college president, after spending their work lives elsewhere.
I wanted to come back here. I knew this town needed us, and we had the ability and the know-how to probably be an asset to Clearview.
Many of the buildings in the old all-black towns are crumbling, abandoned, or neglected by absentee owners. Clearview managed to preserve the old-school gym built in 1939. Now a community center that hosts funerals, family reunions, and other events. Revitalizing Oklahoma's all-black towns is the goal of a group of volunteers called the Coltrane Group.
If all of these buildings are gone, there's really no story. Because now you're looking at an empty land, and people can you visualize just an empty space? But if these buildings were developed, which I think would help the economy for these historical black towns to move forward.
The Coltrane Group leads tours of the all-black towns in hopes of raising interest and funds to keep this vital part of Oklahoma history from being lost forever. Dora McQuarr, Oklahoma City, VOA News.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, a Tanzanian innovator seeks to bring water to rural communities. We'll be right back.
Normoudou, your VOA Health correspondent. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Health Organization says the best way to reduce your chances of being infected or spreading coronavirus is to wear a mask to avoid breathing any small liquid droplets which may contain the virus. Regularly wash your hands with soap and water or clean your hands with an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. For more information on COVID-19, visit who.int or contact your local or national health authorities.
Welcome back to Africa 54. As he grapples domestically with the pandemic, U.S. President Donald Trump has called on the United Nations to hold China accountable for their actions, blaming Beijing for the global spread of COVID-19. In a speech to the world body's 75th General Assembly Tuesday, President Trump echoed many of the themes of his re-election campaign, as White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara reports.
The United Nations General Assembly, normally an extravaganza of world leaders' speeches and round-the-clock diplomacy, is quiet and virtual this year. Leaders gave their speeches by video, including U.S. President Donald Trump.
We will distribute a vaccine. We will defeat the virus. We will end the pandemic. And we will enter a new era of unprecedented prosperity, cooperation, and peace. As we pursue this bright future, we must hold accountable the nation which unleashed this plague onto the world, China.
Trump accused Beijing of not sharing timely information on the coronavirus and not containing the spread of the disease. Chinese ambassador to the UN Zhang Jun rejected the accusations, calling them baseless as he introduced President Xi Jinping, who urged an international response to COVID-19.
Any attempt of politicizing the issue or stigmatization must be rejected. Facing the virus, we should adopt comprehensive and long-term control measures.
With the U.S. election approaching in 6 weeks, Trump's speech echoed much of his campaign rhetoric on China. This has left world leaders wondering whether his remarks reflect a permanent or temporary U.S. position, say some analysts.
Because how the American election plays out is going to cast a huge shadow on how countries in the world, both large powers like the U.S. and China, but even other powers, engage with each other. Will it be under American leadership? Will it be trying to restrain American unilateralism? A lot of these are going to hinge on how the election turns out, and none of the other countries in the world have a vote.
Noting the increased tension between Washington and Beijing, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the world must avoid a new Cold War.
We are moving in a very dangerous direction. Our world cannot afford a future where the two largest economies split the globe in a great fracture, each with its own trade and financial rules and internet and artificial intelligence capacities.
In his Tuesday address, Trump also said the U.S. is fulfilling its destiny as peacemaker, highlighting the recent Abraham Accords, agreements championed by his administration, in which the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain normalized relations with Israel. As in past UNGA remarks, Trump voiced opposition to globalization and touted his America First foreign policy, saying that only when you take care of your own citizens will you find a true basis for cooperation. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News.
The 75th UN General Assembly is breaking new ground by going virtual this year due to the coronavirus. Along with that comes a whole new set of challenges and security risks. Aaron reports for VOA from New York City.
The 75th session of the annual United Nations General Assembly meeting is underway. But this year, world leaders are not at the UN headquarters in New York. They're staying away because of the coronavirus pandemic and instead delivering speeches via pre-taped video and holding important meetings online.
This is all new to us. The idea of going to a virtual format is relatively new to the United Nations, just like it is to the rest of the world. We've been working on our procedures since March, so they keep getting better as people start to become more familiar with the technology.
But the virtual formats are leaving the UN and other organizations open to cybersecurity threats. The widespread shift to virtual platforms has resulted in a 700% increase in cyber breaches this year alone, experts say. Schools, businesses, and organizations are all vulnerable to so-called Zoom bombing interruptions. when hackers break into video conference calls. The door is also open to more dangerous intrusions.
When it comes to organizations like the United Nations, again, you're talking about an organization that many, many different hostile actors stand to benefit by either gaining inside information about what the UN is doing, or by altering that information, or by changing that agenda.
Ransomware attacks have risen 41% in 2019, according to security firm Emasoft. In such attacks, hackers are able to hold a person or organization's data hostage, demanding ransom money to allow the users to regain access. The U.S. cities Atlanta, Baltimore, and Albany have all been targeted in the past. The UN faces potential ransomware attacks and the threat of hackers breaking into computer systems to steal video files and transcripts.
You may also see people looking to repurpose the video for disinformation reasons. You see people sort of editing video these days and trying to use it for whatever their political agenda is. And sort of given the range of hot button issues that the UN is dealing with, I would also be on the lookout for, maybe a rise in disinformation use as well.
But who would conduct such attacks and why?
So I don't think you're going to see ISIS or Al-Qaeda trying to use the internet to sabotage the UN, but there are a variety of either state sponsors or state-sponsored actors or state actors from a variety of different nations that may seek to gain the upper hand or leverage in terms of activities at the UN by either gaining inside knowledge or by altering the course of events through what is going on online.
Brendan Varma says the UN will evaluate how the pandemic and technology develop before deciding whether next year's General Assembly will meet in person or online.
We will make calls based on what works for the United Nations and for the peoples of the world.
But for now, they are working on keeping this year's session safe. Aaron Fedor for VOA News, New York.
Inotech report a self-taught engineer in Tanzania is designing windmills using locally sourced materials to generate power and pump water in the rural communities. VOA technology reporter Paul Ndiho has our report.
This is a fascinating story about Tamimu Kifungu, a young innovator and self-taught handyman who leads a team of talented people in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, dubbed Team Success. He wants to solve Tanzania's energy problems with renewables. This group of self-taught innovators are designing windmills to generate electricity and pump water.
How did you learn about windmills? How did you learn how to make windmills?
Soma through Google. Self-taught through Google and YouTube. I looked at windmills and wells made by white people in the 1970s while in Tanzania and benefited people. We looked at how they built the windmills. We decided to start up the project after taking Google tutorials. It took us between 7 months to a year to start seeing our project benefits the community.
Inspired by his own daily struggles, lack of clean drinking water and electricity, Tamimu Kifungu set out on a mission to build windmills in rural communities across the country. He aims to help Tanzanians become self-sufficient and resolve their problems without reliance on foreign aid.
We talk to people here who need our services as well as community groups involved in agriculture. We give out windmill and wells on credit to such groups. We survey, drill, and install the windmills where they carry out their projects. They pay back in installments after harvest.
In less than 5 years, Team Success has built more than 17 windmills in rural communities, providing cheap drinking water, generating electricity, and bringing smiles to people. Tamim says his early objective was to teach young people with little skills like himself or no education and give them the needed skills that would result in their employment. Analysts say the windmill project is seen as a model for boosting small-scale clean energy projects in Tanzania. But funding for such small-scale windmill pumps is not there, and investors can be hesitant to support such small projects.
If President John Pombe Magufuli was watching you or listening to you, what kind of help would you ask him? What would you tell him to help you accomplish?
Mheshimiwa Rais kama atapata taarifa hii na kutuona kama
In case President Magufuli is watching what we are doing, trying to solve the challenge of lack of electricity and drilling wells to ensure there is water for agriculture, electricity for the community, we need his help to reach as many people as possible.
tuweze kutatua na kuwafikia wengi ambao waliweza kutamani hizi kazi ziwafikie.
Team Success wants to build windmills across the country and perhaps beyond. Despite the challenges, Team Success's windmills are also bringing significant lifestyle changes to their communities. Paul Ndiho, VOA News.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.
Time don't come, my people. Now you ready to ride? Now you ready to ride?